Lesson 35. We continue with the subject called the philosophy of the Kleshas, based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2. And we have arrived at Sutra 13. As long as the root is there, it must ripen and result in lives of different class, length, and experiences. This is based on the idea that a human being reincarnates and needs approximately 1 million reincarnations, 1 million lives, to burn all the karma. And the reason that we need to suffer through so many lives is ignorance. And this sutra is telling us that as long as that karma exists, we have to live through many lives. Each of those lives are different. In one life you're poor, so that you have that kind of experience, so that you can burn karma in that respect. If you don't, you will have to relive it. Another life you are rich, another life you are a woman, in another life you are a man, in another life every life will have other aspects that presenting you to teach you, to enlighten you, to lead you to insight that stops the cycle of rebirth. Now, this applies to the ignorant human being. It is out of ignorance that we just keep suffering the misery without solving it, without progressing. And the system that is proposed here, and you see that in the handout, Buddha proposes us the eightfolded path to deal with this, to solve all the misery. Towards the end of this subject, you will see that Patanjali says exactly the same. To end the suffering, we need consciousness. We need to end the ignorance that is the cause of the suffering. And yoga, among other systems and philosophies, is the way to create, to grow consciousness that leads to insight. That is where we stop suffering the misery again and again. Because from the moment we develop consciousness, we start investigating. Whenever something happens in our lives that causes disruption, that causes pain, that causes any suffering of any kind, we will stand still and say, what's going on here? And why is this happening? What has led to this? Where does this come from? And of course, what can I do? What do I need to do? Because we know by now that emotions, which are caused by suffering, any form of suffering, pain, is not designed just to make us suffering. The suffering is like a wake-up call telling us, hey, pay attention. There's something going on that needs to be addressed. The ignorant person doesn't get that message, doesn't get that signal, and just keeps going, making the same mistake again and again. But the wise person, the person that has solved ignorance through growing consciousness, will start contemplating the issue and eventually come to the essence of the problem. And the moment that you reach the essence of a problem, the problem is not a problem anymore. The moment that you reach the essence of a problem, the solution presents itself very naturally. That is the power of contemplation. Sutra 14. They have joy or sorrow for their fruit, according as their cause is a virtue or vice. Now, we talked about this before. As a human being, at the start of the path of spirituality, or better to say, at the start of the path of developing consciousness, we have a tendency to think that bad experiences, negative experiences need to be avoided, but good experiences are positive and should be allowed or could be allowed. In the beginning, that is of course true. You will focus on the negative experiences and maybe even immerse yourself more in positive experiences, in joyful experiences and what have you. But in the end, in yoga there is no negative and positive. There is no good and bad. What we label good and bad experiences on a technical level are simply movements of energy. Movement of energy that disturb sattva, the condition of total peace. So what generally happens is that we do get a handle on negative experiences more and more, learning how to avoid them more and more through self-study, through introspection, through understanding where the suffering generally comes from. But then what remains is the disruption that is caused by positive experiences. And you will then naturally also try to avoid those disturbances more and more in life. You become selective. Sutra 15. To the people who have developed discrimination, all is misery on account of the pains resulting from change, anxiety and tendency, as also on account of the conflicts between the functioning of the gunas and the vrittis. It's kind of ironic that this sutra is telling us that people who enter the path of spirituality have to suffer. Because consciousness leads to increased suffering in the beginning. So it is very important that we learn to deal with this increased suffering. We have learned pratyahara because of that. We have learned also, and this is very important, that we do not lose ourselves in emotions, which is the natural tendency of human beings. We become more vulnerable than normal human beings, so it is more important that we develop the ability to look at emotions. The moment that they hit us, but then we take a step back and say, in a rational way, in an objective way, we look at what is happening and what it is trying to tell us. And that's an ability that most people don't have. It's an important skill to develop and important not to forget next time when confronted with emotions, because the first natural reaction is to drown in the emotion. Pains resulting from change always leads to disruption. If you look at statistics or research, the biggest disruption in people's lives is losing a partner, when your partner dies. The second biggest disruption, have you any idea what that is? Is moving house. The second biggest stress factor in people's lives is actually moving house. I was very surprised when I learned about that, but it makes sense. It's very disruptive. I don't like to move. if I don't have to. So change. How do you deal with change as a yogi? You stay practical. People who are confronted with stressful situations have a tendency to panic or freak out. And that's really not helpful. It makes everything worse. Stay practical. Make a list of the things that you need to do to deal with the situation. And just focus on practical things. And in case of losing a partner, that is a huge emotional affair that also a yogi cannot avoid. You need to focus on practical daily things and not lose routine. Get up in the morning even though you feel depressed, feel sad, feel you'd rather draw the blankets over your head and not get out of bed all day. Just get up and start doing what you normally do. Make some tea, have breakfast, take care of your loved ones that depend on you, whether that's parents or children or pets. Just take care of just normal daily things, and it will not take away the loss. That is simply a matter of time, the grieving process, the mourning process, but it will help you to stay with both feet on the ground and not lose yourself in self-destructive behavior. Worries and anxiety. Worries are caused by desires that we have about the future. And in this respect, at some point in this course, I mentioned a bucket list. A bucket list is an unnecessary source of anxiety. But the reason why we make a bucket list is because we are afraid to lose out on some kind of experience in our lives before we die. And I told you not to get rid of the bucket list, but just play with it. Keep a playful attitude. Shrug your shoulders if there is something that you cannot achieve. And just enjoy it when you can. Engage in one of the activities that's on the list. And for the rest, it's not important. The only thing that is important is our well-being. And a bucket list, if we deal with it subconsciously, can affect our internal well-being quite badly. Tendencies and habits. The most stable way of living life is very boring. It's by having a routine. I am very much a routine person. But routine can get disturbed. You go to work every morning taking a bus, but then the government is building a new subway line, and as soon as the subway line is completed, they cancel several bus lines because they're not needed anymore. Now you have to walk more, do more effort to get to the subway station, and the subway station doesn't stop exactly where you need to be, where the bus took you in the past. So that kind of change usually leads to stress. Or you have a newspaper that these days, of course, the internet it's not necessary anymore to have a paper anymore. A physical newspaper, but I remember very clear. I lived on the 5th floor, and the mailboxes were on the ground floor, and I had a subscription to a newspaper. So every morning I would have to go down. There was no elevator, so 5 floors down to get the newspaper, and then you go up again, and you have a cup of tea, and you have your breakfast while going through the news. Now you have a smartphone, and you don't need all that anymore, But then there comes a morning that you go all the way down, you open the mailbox, and there's nothing. The delivery guy, or mostly guys, but also girls, the delivery person skipped your mailbox by accident. Can happen. If you don't pay attention, you start to grumble, you get angry. It can ruin your day because it's your habit to just start your day like that, and it lays the foundation for a day that is controlled and feeling good and what have you. What I used to do if the newspaper didn't arrive, I would go to the old paper bin and take my Saturday newspaper out, because the Saturday newspaper is more than 100 pages thick, has many sections about sailing, about camping, about cars, about sports, about fashion, and you can't read that even in a weekend. So you throw away your newspaper having half of it, you have not read it. So instead of grumbling and getting angry, I would just revisit the Saturday newspaper and go through the sections. Although it's not really my interest, I would just keep myself going, reading some other stuff that I hadn't had time to go through in the weekend. Conflict between conditions and worlds. The conditions is sattva, rajas, and tamas. Each of these conditions make us function in a different way. When we sleep, we are in tamas. In the daytime, we are in rajas. When we are relatively in control of our rhythm, we still fluctuate, but we are relatively sattvic. When you are supposed to be in tamas so that you rest, sleep, recover, it can happen sometimes when you're very stressed, when you're very busy, when you're exhausted. It's really strange, but when you're exhausted, it's often very difficult to sleep. So there you have a conflict between the condition and the worlds. You're supposed to be sleeping in tamas, but your exhaustion doesn't allow you to sleep. Worries can give you sleepless nights. Stress can give you sleepless nights, anxiety, and you're supposed to sleep. So the exhaustion that you're suffering from is compounded by your inability to sleep. So you need to find a way to break that cycle and get back to your balance as soon as possible. In relation to the previous sutra, I made a side note here. Do you know the Netflix series Vikings? Have you seen it? So that's based on historic facts. It's a little bit dramatized, but there is Ragnar, the Viking leader, who goes to England and becomes prisoner of King Egbert. Now, although they are kind of enemies, they connect with each other. And so while Ragnar is imprisoned in a cage, King Egbert regularly visits with him and has intellectual conversations with him. And at some point, he says this. This is in season 4, episode 14, towards the end. King Egbert says, "All is vanity and vexation of spirit. In such wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow." This is in relation to Sutra 15 that we're just now talking about. The people who have developed discrimination, all is misery on account of the pains resulting from change. And one of the diseases of the disciple is that our increased sensitivity and consciousness, like King Egbert also says, leads to grief and sorrow. In all such wisdom lies grief and sorrow. So it is very important that we learn about pratyahara, I say it again, and that we we do not develop or adopt the negative attitude that many religious people have, that life is a valley of tears and that you just have to suck it up. Because that is a nihilistic approach to the reality that, yes, increased consciousness leads to vulnerability, but there are ways to deal with that. You do not have to suffer that. If you just passively suffer from it, you have missed the point. You need to actively engage with that misery and learn something from it and do something with it, because that is what it is designed to do in the first place. Questions? Okay, let's have a short break. Then after asana we have a new pranayama.